Community partnerships are a bringing together of various statutory and non-statutory organisations within East Suffolk that actually want to come together and make a difference for the people that live, work and play in our district. East Suffolk Council is a fairly new council. We're now the largest district council by population in the country. We've got 250,000 people. We've got 487 square miles, and that is shared out by 55 councillors. We didn't want to lose touch with the community, so we thought what's important is to introduce this community partnership concept. So we've got 8 community partnerships across the district, and they can really focus on local issues. And we've provided the funding in order to allow them to make that real difference.
The strategic board gives us allocates 300,000 for the whole of East Suffolk. But over the next 3 years, each partnership will get a total of £85,000, which will really enable us to do something very positive, I think, in each partnership.
We are trying to help the people who live in our communities, and one of the things which came to the fore at our very first meeting was social isolation. Another thing which came to the fore was a lack of rural transport.
All of us chairs get together on the Community Partnership Board, so we've actually found that 6 of the Community Partnership Group had social isolation as a top priority, and 6 of the Community Partnership Groups had transport as their top priorities. So the Community Partnership Board, which is above all of the partnerships, have actually taken on the work to look at a wider East Suffolk scale, which is a different amount of funding, which leaves us with our smaller pots of money to actually spend on other things in our group.
So over the life of this council, we've allocated £3.4 million to local community initiatives, and that's made up of the community enabling budgets that the councillors have, or each one of those has £7,500. We have the local community partnerships, each one of those receives £25,000 per year, and the rest is allocated to the Community Partnership Board to spend on projects that cut across a number of community partnership areas.
So we spent our first £10,000 on our younger people. It's been really successful. Kessenland have reopened a youth group which has got about 21 users, ranging from about 11 to 16.
Because we've got open space, we're able to run through the village setup football teams for youngsters up to the age of 10, 11, and that brings a lot of people out just to get entertainment, particularly on a Saturday. And then the cafe, the voluntary cafe, also functions, and they're quite happy to have teas and coffees from there.
Of course, never before have we been through the situation that we're going through now. COVID-19 has created even more of a challenge for our local communities, and to be fair for the council as well, in the way that we're responding to that and supporting people through this really, really difficult time. So community partnership boards have really come to their fore. You know, the contacts they have made within the local community groups has allowed people to wrap around the most vulnerable in their communities. The food banks have started up, the good neighbourhood schemes, the shopping for other people, just the general coming together of the community, stepping out and clapping for the NHS. All these were really positive things and enhanced the work of the community partnership boards and brought people together where otherwise people didn't even know who they lived next door to before, but now those communities are really building, and we are taking advantage of that growth in community cohesion in order to enhance the work of the community partnerships.
There's been an explosion in terms of people's vulnerability, how isolated they felt for a number of months. And I think at the moment, with the risk that we won't come out of this until March at the earliest, people start to panic, I think, and start to think, when is it going to be an end for me? So we've recognised that, and we've got some fantastic groups in Felixstowe, Basic, Facts, the Salvation Army, an organisation we've set up called Felixstowe Helping Hands, who are supporting these people, but we need to coordinate that support.
Because of COVID, we haven't been able to have face-to-face meetings. So meetings didn't take place for a while, but we have now been having them via Zoom. I've been impressed with the number of people who have actually logged on. We are getting as many, if not more, than we had when we were meeting face to face.
Overall, we're extremely pleased with how things are going with community partnerships. They've stepped up to working difficultly in the COVID situation and transformed to working online, holding Zoom meetings. It's been a challenge for everyone to get together and to focus on their 3 or 4 priorities that they've set, and the meetings have continued to take place, and they are now delivering spending money and enabling projects to take place in their areas.
Do you know, I think one of the most important things about community partnerships is the support of the officers, because without them none of this would happen. And they turn up to the meetings and they do stuff and they go away and they still do stuff, and it's like a duck. The feet are going away madly underneath and everything drifts along quite happily on top of the water. And there's a huge commitment there from all of the officers that want to make this work. Definitely.
Well, the people of East Suffolk are of course East Suffolk. That's what it's all about. And you know, we're passionate that not only do we want to do the best we can for them, but we want to empower them to do the best that they can for themselves. I think it's very wrong when councils try to tell people what they should be doing and drive communities in a particular direction. So by reaching out in this way, what we've done is we've gone, look, we're here to support you. We will support you through the problem-solving process. We will provide financial resilience in order for you to deliver against those priorities. But it's over to you people. What do you want to do and how do you want to change your local community?
It's doing something for the community, isn't it? And it's if you see the outcomes, that's what you want for people to feel they're seeing that light, they're seeing an improvement.
It's a privilege, really. It's nice to find what you can do for the community, how you can make it better. When we've looked at the statistics and we found what we're in need of, it's been able to make a difference.
The community is effectively a group. It's a group of souls, if you like, all together. And when you get one group working, another one will come on. And this is it. And especially if they've got something to do when they come together. I enjoy people, and I enjoy doing things or helping people along when I can. And that's what I do, as I spend a lot of time doing that.
I'm really pleased to see how many people have come forward and volunteered, and how many people want to give so much back to the communities that they live and work in. We so want to make sure that we deliver the projects to our communities and make sure that we can spend the money and make a big difference. And I'm really pleased with everyone that's taken part. Thank you.
Right, good morning everyone, and thanks for joining us for this final event of this year's East Suffolk Community Partnership Forum. I'm Steve Gallant, I'm the leader of East Suffolk Council and also the chair of the Community Partnership Board, and I'll be facilitating this meeting this morning. I hope you enjoyed that video. Sorry about the false start at the beginning. I thought you know, I wouldn't want you to miss out on hearing my voice as much as possible, so I was a bit disappointed when I wasn't coming through, but now you're hearing me loud and clear, I hope. So welcome and thanks for giving up the time for coming. Can I remind you all that this session is being recorded, and during the discussions at this event, can I ask that all participants remain on mute when they're not speaking, and that they raise their hand virtually to indicate they wish to contribute, so that I can invite you all in to speak at various points. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Zoom, but just in case you're not, you can raise your hand if you open the Participants tab, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen, and select the Raise Hand option. And you can also lower your hand from the Participants tab as well. You can, if you're particularly adept, also raise and lower your hand by using the keyboard shortcut, which is Alt and Y. I said at our launch event on Monday that we were originally planning to have our annual forum at Trinity Park to build on the hugely successful ESP forums of the past, but for obvious reasons, we changed our plans and decided to hold our first ever community partnership forum as a virtual event. I think what we have pulled off this week has turned out to be really successful. and today I'll be taking a brief look back at over the week before we begin our main presentation. But before that, I'll just run through the programme for today. So today we aim to wrap up our 5-day virtual event and reflect on the key outcomes of the sessions so far. We'll then move on to look at the future here in East Suffolk with a specific focus on the potential social, economic and environmental impacts that COVID-19 has brought us and the challenges it has posed for us here in East Suffolk. The timings of the day, well, everything's a little bit fluid, of course, particularly when I'm talking, but you know, we're looking for the welcome and summary of the week, you know, about 20 minutes from me. Then I'll be handing over to Nicole Rickard, our keynote speaker for today, and Nicole will take about 40 minutes to deliver her presentation, and then we'll move into a question and answer session. And you know, the questions and answers today, the questions can be on anything really. We've got a number of real key partners here with us on this call today, so I'm sure that they won't mind being put on the spot if there's particular questions on particular issues. So to begin with, a review of the week and what a week it's turned out to be. Over the course of the week, we've enjoyed 10 separate sessions, well 11 if you count our additional fringe event. It's always nice for a conference to have a fringe event or two, and we certainly had a really good one this week. We participated together in about 16.5 hours of presentation and discussion. We've welcomed a total of about 208 delegates to our forum. This translated into just short of 600 individual bookings over all of the 10 sessions, as most people attended more than one. And as every one of those sessions has focused on our community partnership priorities, we've generated a whole host of interests, ideas, and indeed possible solutions that we can feed into our work going forward. As you can imagine, this didn't happen without a lot of effort from a whole host of individuals who I must thank now for their support to make this such an informative, dynamic, and enjoyable experience. So on Monday, as you can see on the screen there, Dominic Campbell, the CEO of Future Gov, Dom perfectly set the scene for the week with a thought-provoking and at times challenging exploration of how we need to constantly question ourselves about what it is we are looking to achieve in our communities and our organisations, and how we organise ourselves and to actually deliver against those needs. His presentation was made up all the more relevant by his reflections on the impact of COVID-19 and the response of our communities to the challenges it has posed. On Tuesday, our focus moved to social isolation and loneliness, and we were really pleased to have Cormac Russell, who's a leading expert on asset-based community development, Kim Ledbetter from the Joe Cox Foundation, Tracy Robbins from the Eden Project, Anne Osborne from the Rural Coffee Caravan, Sally Connick from Community Action Suffolk, and our very own Nicole Rickard, who not only represents East Suffolk Council, but also the 2 CCGs as well. So a packed day of 4 sessions that include a blend of experts in their field, together with our own successful local community-led projects. This proved to be both challenging and inspirational day, where we all learned a lot about the importance of staying socially connected, and how we can best approach the task of working together at a very local community level. On Wednesday, we changed and started to look at the travel and transport issues, and we were really pleased to welcome Andrew Sumner, who's from Transport East, and Alexander Nicol, who's the LGA Public Transport Consortium Chair, together with various members and officers from the County Council and indeed from East Suffolk Council. Another excellent day that focused on 2 of the most important issues for our community partnerships, those being rural transport and active and sustainable travel. Participants were updated on what the data is saying about travel and transport within our district, together with the rapidly changing national transport priorities. We then participated in some really positive discussions about how we could all work together from a regional to a local level to make a better future for travel and transport within East Suffolk. On Thursday, we started this focus on the technology. Morag McGuinness from East Suffolk Council and Stuart Wise and the team at BT. It was important for us to reflect on the rapid advances in technology and increasing use of data that are currently underway somewhere in our programme. This is because they're increasingly disrupting traditional ways of doing business and offering us challenging and exciting opportunities for our local communities. We started with an excellent session on our homegrown East Suffolk programme, our Smart Town project. This is really exciting development and it stimulated a lot of interest and indeed discussion. And in the afternoon, we were taken on a whirlwind tour of BT Industrial Park to see examples of cutting edge technology that is being developed right here within East Suffolk. And let's not forget that fringe event that I mentioned, excellent zero carbon communities fringe event that took place on Thursday too, led by James Mallender, the Cabinet Member for the Environment at East Suffolk Council, joined by Graham Duxbury from Groundworks UK, Richard Powell and Jane Healy as well. I also just need to, at this point, extend my thanks to Nicola Wotton, Matt Deakins, Sarah Davis, Camilla Hopkins, all from East Suffolk Council, for setting us up on Zoom and managing the mechanics of the sessions. No easy task, as we know technology all the time can be wonderful, but does require the odd dexterity in flicking the right thing and clicking the right switch. So many thanks to everything they've done. I also want to extend a special thank you to Luke Bennett, who's been instrumental in pulling this week-long event together. Without his commitment and indeed tenacity, we would not have secured the excellent keynote speakers that we've all enjoyed. Luke is the one that manages the process of turning our ambitions into a reality. And last but no means least, I want to thank the East of England Local Government Association for their support. In particular, I want to thank Jane Cole, who has done magnificently as ever in pulling us all into shape. So, community partnerships, it's worth remembering what sits behind this event, which is, of course, our community partnerships. So community partnerships are this innovative way for the council, partners and communities to work together to bring ideas to life. It's all about taking this solution-focused approach to local priorities. And as you saw in the video, we're starting to really see results in that area. We've now got 8 community partnerships based on those natural groupings of communities using our new East Suffolk Council wards as the building blocks. We focus on what we know, that's the data, and what people know, and that's the insight, and that's really important. You can't have one without the other. We problem solve and build in consensus around important issues in their area. Originally, obviously, our vision was for community partnerships to meet in public, out there in their communities, village halls, community buildings, etc. But presently, of course, we are meeting virtually. Many of the partnerships are now focusing much of their time on supporting their communities to tackle the COVID recovery. All 8 community partnership chairs sit on the community partnership board alongside key strategic partners to tackle some of the really important issues that are common to many of our communities. The current priorities they're working on are about tackling social isolation and loneliness, and of course transport and rural transport being key to that. Examples of where we've spent our budget so far: we've contributed to the Hardship Fund and the Hidden Needs Fund. We're supporting a campaign to attract and retain community volunteers. We put up 100k to set up the Bounce Back Fund that launched recently to support our voluntary and community groups. We've also pulling together a support package for our 8 community partnerships to engage better with their rural areas. And of course, we've extended the East Suffolk Grandpads loan scheme, which is proving absolutely vital to many, many vulnerable individuals in our community. So to repeat my summary of progress from Monday, overall, the community partnerships are absolutely where we'd hoped they would be. They are already making a difference. They have responded magnificently to the challenges of moving to virtual working to follow guidelines on meetings, social distancing, and I really want to thank everyone involved with them in moving that forward. They are spending their budgets on real projects that are making a difference in the local community. But this is just the first and probably the most challenging year. And I want to stress that this is a long-term program. We want them to achieve more in the future as they become more established, and each community partnership builds their own track record of delivering real and tangible improvements on the ground in their communities. They represent a major investment by East Suffolk Council. The total delivery budget across all 8 community partnerships and the Community Partnership Board is about 1.7 million to tackle priority issues that have been identified as important by our people and for our places in East Suffolk. So looking to the future of East Suffolk, to tie all this into the East Suffolk business plan, our aim is to deliver the highest quality of life possible for everyone who lives in, works in and visits East Suffolk. To help us achieve this, we use this strategic plan as our compass to guide all our decision making. The 5 themes that you can see in front of you on the screen there guide everything that East Suffolk does. They don't work, however, in isolation, but rather they work in concert, and each new project, initiative or service must test itself against them all. If you haven't viewed this document, that's our strategic plan, please do visit our website and have a look. It is, after all, our roadmap to success. Well, that's a lot of words from me, but I think it's important to set out those things and to build on the way that we're looking to the future, and also to thank the many people that have come together in order to help us this week in delivering this conference. However, I'm going to now hand over, if I may, to Nicole Rickard, who's the head of communities at East Suffolk Council, and is also works for both of the Norfolk and Waveney and Ipswich and East Suffolk clinical commissioning groups as well. Nicole, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Really nice to see you all with us. And I'm going to throw quite a lot of information at you over the next sort of 25 minutes, half an hour or so, but and some of it will be about what's happening in East Suffolk at the moment. Some of it's thoughts about what might happen in East Suffolk in the future, but I think perhaps the most important bit is what we're doing about some of the issues that have been identified. So that will be the last bit of the presentation. And what I'd really like you all to do is listen to it and absorb some of the facts that I'm going to throw out, and some of the information about what might happen in the future, and think about what else we could do to tackle some of the things that have been identified as potentially having a negative impact on East Suffolk. So probably the first bit of the presentation won't be that cheerful, but I promise you it will get a lot more positive as we go through and talk about some of the things that are happening. And I must admit, when I put this presentation together, I pulled it together a few weeks ago based on something that I did for the Community Partnership Board. I didn't imagine that I'd be delivering it having just started a second lockdown. So I think that also adds an additional context to some of the things that I'm going to say. So just a bit of a reminder about the East Suffolk population, just under 250,000 people. And there's some stats there about age, and I'll talk a bit more about some of those as we go through. And I'm not going to read out absolutely everything on these slides, but I have pulled together fairly comprehensive information on them so that people can refer back to them if they want to. And I know there are a number of people who wanted to join us this morning, but because of what's happened this week, are unable to join the session and have asked if the information would be available. So I've deliberately put quite a lot of information on the slides that otherwise I might just have talked through. And I'd like to say a big thank you to the knowledge team at the County Council and the Suffolk Office of Data Analytics, because they've pulled together a lot of this information for us, and they were the ones that pulled together the information for the data packs that were used for the community partnership workshops and also for the Suffolk pack, and that's where a lot of these statistics are taken from. So I'm not going to talk through this slide in any detail. This was just meant to provide a little bit of context about what East Suffolk was like before COVID-19. So you'll see there's some statistics about the population, about deprivation, about life expectancy, about employment sectors in East Suffolk. And I'm going to pull out some of these as we talk about what East Suffolk might look like in the future. So I'm going to start talking about population and deprivation, and all the way through the presentation I'm going to focus on what the potential impacts might be, and some of them are based on early work to gather statistics about the impacts of COVID, and some of them are trying to kind of, I guess, forecast the future and understand what might happen. So in terms of this slide, if you look at the little tile on the bottom left-hand side, there's a repeat from the previous slide. So 27% of the population in East Suffolk are over 65. The England average is 18%. So there's a big difference between the England average and the number of over 65s in East Suffolk. And almost 4% of our population is over 85. And again, compared to England, that statistic is 2.4%. So big difference in terms of the profile of our population. And one of the things that we know is that the older population is more vulnerable to COVID-19. And one of the estimates that I think was used quite widely was that somebody over 80 is 70 times more likely to die from COVID-19 than somebody under 40. And we've also done a lot of work at a Suffolk level, trying to understand who is already financially, clinically and or socially vulnerable, and therefore may become more so as a result of the pandemic. And I'll talk a bit later on about people that are newly vulnerable, but we've got a group of people in East Suffolk and Suffolk as a whole that are already vulnerable for a variety of reasons. And one of the pieces of work that Suffolk County Council has done has produced a profile of vulnerability, and that estimates that we've got about 2,200 people in East Suffolk who've got 4 or more vulnerability indicators across one or more of those 3 types of vulnerability. And one of the things I think we've touched on a couple of times during the week is the digital divide. The fact that because of necessity, more and more services and community activities and voluntary sector support has moved online, and that means that some people within our communities will become more excluded. So this is a piece of work from the profile that I mentioned that the County Council's knowledge team and SODA have produced, which just provides some statistics about East Suffolk. There is a profile for each of the districts and also for Suffolk as a whole, and they've also broken it down by CCG area. And I've just put some arrows on some of the ones I wanted to focus on. There's a lot of information on there, and we are looking at kind of sense checking that and ensuring that the information that goes into that is correct, and that's information from a whole range of sources. So in East Suffolk, out of our almost 250,000 population, we've got just over 66,500 people who've got at least one vulnerability indicator, or 47,500 households. And I'll talk a bit more about the shielding list later on. We can see there things like the number of over 70s, the number of individual children and households receiving free school meals, the number of carers, the number of care leavers or looked after children. And that gives you a sense of the sort of things that have been used to develop that profile. And I think it's really important that we continue to use that and do proactive work with some of our vulnerable groups. And certainly during the first lockdown, we did quite a lot of targeted work focusing on the people that have been identified as having 3 or 4 vulnerability indicators, just to check how they were doing during the lockdown and whether they needed any additional support. I've included this one about children and young people. This is around education and educational deprivation. And on this type of map, anything that's coloured dark blue is the most deprived 20%, and anything that's coloured the sort of pale yellow colour is the least deprived 20%. And I think it's safe to say that the existing challenges, particularly in the north of the district in relation to social mobility and education deprivation, some of these challenges are likely to be compounded by COVID. We know that the concerns that both school attainment and employment for young people will be impacted by COVID-19. And we had 15.2% of children affected by income deprivation in East Suffolk compared to the Suffolk average of 13.6%. So there's some potential challenges around how we support our children and young people and try to ensure that we get them back on track as soon as possible. In terms of deprivation more generally, so this is the map on the left is from the Index of Deprivation 2019, and this is the composite index, so it's a number of indicators of deprivation combined together. Again, dark blue is most deprived and yellow is least deprived. So if you look at that map, you can see that there's a range of areas that are experiencing deprivation, multiple deprivation, but that it's not all in Lowestoft and parts of Felixstowe. There are a number of rural areas that are showing blue on that map as well. But I think one of the key things in relation to COVID is that it's estimated that twice as many people are infected and die in deprived areas. So that means that some parts of East Suffolk have been and will continue to be more impacted than other areas. And we're likely to see an increase in deprivation levels, which means that some deprived communities could become even more deprived, and the gap between deprived and more affluent communities could grow. And if you look at that map, you can see there are a number of areas where there are yellow areas, so the least deprived 20%, adjacent to the most deprived 20%. So the experiences of people living in those communities could vary quite significantly. And I just thought I'd put this quote in, which is from a number of, it's from a specific study which looks at the link between deprivation and also the impacts of COVID on ethnic minority and migrant communities. So this flags up that deprivation is a prominent risk factor in community-based transmission of COVID and is particularly impacted by employment and multi-occupancy housing, and highlights that overcrowding has a negative effect on health outcomes. But it also makes the link that these factors disproportionately impact on ethnic minority and migrant communities, who are therefore likely to experience high levels of deprivation than the national average, and therefore more likely to be at risk from COVID-19. So turning to health and well-being, I've put some tiles on the left-hand side there about gaps in life expectancy. And you can see we've got a gap of 10.9 years within the district between males in the Deben ward and the Kirkley ward, and a gap of 14.8 years in life expectancy between females in the Curtin ward and the Kirkley ward. So that was the gaps in life expectancy before COVID. And we know that it's likely, and I know that a significant number of health colleagues and social care colleagues are concerned that overall population health will deteriorate. And that's partly because fewer people are seeking help with long-term conditions. And that obviously means that East Suffolk population is more likely to be impacted as older people have more comorbidities and we have more older people. There's concerns about deconditioning and frailty because of lack of exercise and activity during COVID. There are concerns that those life expectancy gaps that I've talked about may increase further. We know from research and from anecdotal information that some groups have been particularly impacted by the lockdown between March and July. And one particular example of that is people with dementia and their carers who found that particularly tough. There's concerns identified that people may seek escape from ongoing restrictions through alcohol, cigarettes, possibly drugs, and obviously the long-term impacts that that has. And I think the next one's really important, and I'll come on in a bit to talk about social isolation and loneliness, but I think there's a real concern that the change in social interactions as a result of COVID will in turn change relationships and may have a real impact on individual and community resilience. And I'm sure everyone has experienced that during COVID, the first lockdown and the period that followed that. But I think it was really interesting discussion as part of the social isolation and loneliness session on Tuesday, and one of the speakers asked everyone on the session if they'd made a new friend via Zoom or Skype or Teams on all the calls that they were doing. And I think just use that to illustrate that potentially we don't have those connection points with other people, doing everything virtually and not having the opportunity to talk to people at the start of a meeting, or when you turn up at a village hall to do a workshop early and talk to the people that are there. And I think there was a strong feeling in that session that something was being lost. So another aspect of health and well-being is mental health. The map on the left shows the picture before COVID and by GP practice. So it shows that actually before COVID, we'd got a relatively balanced picture. So prevalence of depression was higher than the national average among patients at 8 of the 25 GP practices, similar at 9 and lower at 8. So a completely kind of balanced picture. But I think it's safe to say that both through the Home But Not Alone hub that the communities team ran and our social prescribers, so the connectors and link workers that are out there working with people in the community, definitely saw increased mental ill health during the first lockdown and subsequently, because of isolation and loneliness, because of hardship, because of loss of employment. And an 8.1% decline in mental health is predicted, particularly in young adults, women, and those with existing poor mental health. And I think the other thing we need to think about is the increased demand on both statutory services, but particularly on voluntary community and social enterprise organisations who are supporting people with their mental health. So I mentioned loneliness. I think that's a really important feature, and I'll explain how that links into the community partnerships in a moment. And I'm sure you all know the definitions of loneliness and isolation on the right hand side of that slide. The map again shows where it's more likely that people are likely to be socially isolated. And I think the thing that strikes me about that map is the mixture between rural areas. And actually, if you look at the area that covers Melton Woodbridge and the Deben Peninsula, so the area above the Felixstowe area, there's a lot of blue, dark blue in that area, which is mainly predominantly rural, but there's also a lot of blue in some of the more urban communities in East Suffolk. And I think one of the things that's been identified is that social isolation and loneliness are impacting everybody, but particularly young people, despite their digital connectivity. And actually, a third of young people said that their mental health was worse following the first lockdown, with changes in mood, thoughts and feelings. And that's taken from a Healthwatch Suffolk survey. And again, you can see the isolation map for children and young people on the left-hand side there. And some of the areas are the same, but some of them are quite different. And I think one of the things we've tried to do is use these maps to target particular areas. And I'll talk about our Hidden Needs Grants programme a little bit later. So turning our attention to the economy and employment, we know that East Suffolk has a high proportion of small and medium enterprises. We know that they're more vulnerable to the impacts of COVID-19. Sectors like hospitality have been hit particularly hard, and that's important because actually we've got 1 in 10 people in East Suffolk are employed in the hospitality sector. We've also got high numbers of people in low skill, low wage jobs, and the concern is that those people could be forced out of these jobs as other businesses close and people move down into the job market in that particular sector of the job market from the level above. There's likely to be a long-term increase in insecure job contracts and overall job insecurity, so things like 0 hours contracts. And the possibility that people may be forced to leave East Suffolk to find work, particularly young people and families. And we're about balanced in terms of the working population versus dependents. So dependents are children and older people at the moment. So obviously any shift in population or significant shift in population could really impact on that. So in terms of employment deprivation, I mean, we had 9.8% of people, working age people, in employment deprivation prior to COVID, again higher than the Suffolk average, which was 8.3%. And there's serious concern that higher rates of unemployment could become embedded. We know that that is particularly an issue for younger people. So 20 to 34-year-olds make up the largest groups, those classified as unemployed by the DWP. And those age bands have seen the largest rise since March 2020. And you can see the statistics there for the broken down groups. So 132% in 20 to 24-year-olds, 122% in 25 to 29-year-olds, and 109% in 30 to 34-year-olds. And again, I've put the map in just so you can see where the kind of most deprived areas are in terms of employment in East Suffolk. And the point of putting all the maps in is to understand that we can do some targeted work with communities that we do know where communities were being more affected prior to COVID, and therefore we could do some specific targeted work to tackle some of the issues that have been identified. And I've got some charts and graphs here from again, which have been produced by SODA and other partners. So this is the statistics of, this is the map that shows redundancies. It shows that up to July 2020, redundancies had doubled, and they were at the highest since June 2009. There's the Office of Budget Responsibility have produced various coronavirus scenarios which models the impact of COVID on the UK economy. They've produced 3 scenarios which predict peak unemployment rates. So these range from 9.7% in the best case scenario to 13.2% in the worst case scenario, or as it says on the slide, the upside and downside scenarios. So in terms of furloughs, we know that overall across Suffolk, nearly 100,000 employments have been furloughed. In East Suffolk, that was 30,000, and that was the figure that was taken in June. 42.2% of those are under 30. But it was estimated at the point the survey was done that 82% would retain their jobs. Jobs vacancies obviously dropped off a cliff while we were in the first lockdown. They are slowly starting to recover, so there is some sign that they're recovering. This is a Suffolk statistics on this slide. They are showing that that Suffolk businesses have many of those required to close have reopened, although obviously that has changed again this week, and so we don't know what the longer term impact of that will be. Generally, during the first lockdown, people got more positive as they moved out of the lockdown, and you can see some of the statistics on there about recruitment plans and what people would like to improve. So moving on to housing and welfare support. We have a number of people that are affected by income deprivation. We've talked about the overall income deprivation, but the tiles on the left-hand side show older people and younger people affected by income deprivation, both higher than the Suffolk averages. So just in terms of housing and welfare support, I think this is going to be a key issue. We know that unemployment and financial insecurity will impact on housing security, and that's likely to change the volume and type of demand for housing. So potentially more people looking for rented housing. It's likely that more people will be living in overcrowded, unstable and insecure housing. More people will need welfare support. So universal credit claims increased by 70% between March and April 2020 and over 90% since April 2019. And lots of people were claiming benefits for the first time. And we know that people are starting to need support to meet basic life needs, so shelter, food and fuel. Which is going to lead to pressures, knock-on pressures on housing services, things like food banks, advice services like our Citizens Advice, etc. And future lockdowns, and obviously given the situation we're in, there is likely to be additional pressure on community response services, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. So just some more slides, which I won't dwell on too much, but this one shows the claimant count, so the universal or the benefits claimant count. So the fastest rise since the benefit system was set up in 1920. But the rate of growth in people claiming benefits and being treated unemployed had slowed before this lockdown. In terms of overall statistics, there's 56,000 plus universal credit claimants across Suffolk. Which shows that the overall numbers have increased by 78%. So overall, 12.6% of the Suffolk working age population is claiming universal credit. And just in terms of individual district numbers, we've seen a lower level of growth in East Suffolk, in fact, the lowest level of growth of universal credit claimants, but we've still got significant numbers claiming. You can see almost 20,000 people by September 20. So although it's good in that our numbers haven't increased significantly, there is an impact in terms of the overall huge numbers that are claiming. And I think something that's particularly significant is the increase in in-work poverty. So that's people that are claiming universal credit while in employment, and that's increased by 85% since March 2020. So that's a lot of statistics and graphs and tables, and I'm just going to focus a little bit on the community impacts and inequality. We've definitely seen an increase in antisocial behaviour reports at the district level, and that's both neighbour and community level, so individual neighbour tensions, but also concerns at a community level. And I know that there are concerns that community tensions may emerge as potentially more people lose their jobs, people have got less money, the gap between the haves and the have-nots grow, and potentially frustration about growing restrictions. We've seen, campaigns against the restrictions. We've seen people protesting in other areas. We know that reported domestic abuse crimes are up by about 25% on a 3-year average, and that both of the services that support medium risk and high risk victims have seen increases of similar level. There's an increase in exploitative crime, so for example, financial scams, concerns about family breakdowns that could increase the number of vulnerable young people, and also the number of children in care, which was already higher in East Suffolk than in the rest of Suffolk. And particular concerns about care leavers who are vulnerable anyway, and generally are able to achieve worse outcomes than their equivalent. But I think there's a particular concern that they may be left behind as a result of COVID. And obviously concerns that effort to balance the books nationally to pay for the various initiatives that have been put in place to deal with COVID will impact on public services and voluntary and community sector organisations particularly. So in terms of the Home But Not Alone service, I was just going to focus on that for a little bit because it's particularly relevant because we've stood that back up as of Wednesday of this week. So in the first lockdown, we received just over 2,000 requests for help on the Home But Not Alone service. Home But Not Alone is a Suffolk-wide service. And a real partnership effort between the county and district councils, but also Community Action Suffolk and Suffolk Association of Local Councils and various other organisations who all play a part in the jigsaw of supporting people that are vulnerable. And it's interesting that we provided a lot of food support. We helped people to access prescriptions. A number of people had quite urgent need because they got less than 3 days worth of supplies. But we also had various requests for support because people were starting to feel lonely and isolated. And so we've got around 14,000 people on the list of shielded people in clinically extremely vulnerable people in East Suffolk who were shielded during the last lockdown. And they are the people that during this month-long lockdown have been advised that they can exercise and access health appointments, but have been advised not to leave the home to shop or to pick up prescriptions. And so the support has been stood up for them and for other shielded people. But the idea this time is that we help people to find a sustainable source of food rather than providing. The government is not providing free food parcels, etc. this time. So, and one of the things that the community team has been doing, working with our customer services team, is proactively calling anyone that's been added to the list since July. So they're new to being on the clinically extremely vulnerable list and potentially don't understand what support might be available to them, but also anyone who was receiving a government food parcel at the end of July when the Home But Not Alone service ended. So trying to do some proactive work to make sure that people are being supported and are able to access food during the next month. And I think generally that has been, the good news is that I think a lot of people have managed to become self-sufficient, but we are still getting some calls through of people that need support. But the whole Home But Not Alone response was only possible because we had such a hugely impressive community response in East Suffolk, both existing groups and new or pop-up mutual aid groups. And in huge parts of the districts, we just got groups that just mobilised incredibly quickly, that were providing all sorts of amazing support for their communities and lots of, not just the fundamentals, but lots of extras that helped make people's quality of life much better during the first lockdown. So I think there's a really positive response and a really good news story in relation to that. But I think we know that some of our key voluntary and community sector organisations could struggle to survive. And Community Action Suffolk did a survey which identified that 47% of voluntary and community sector organisations, this was a couple of months ago, felt that they wouldn't be operating within 12 months with lack of income, as probably no surprise to anybody, was a key concern. And the survey identified that they need funding to pay premises bills, to retain staff, to support new ways of working, but also to support core costs. And I think we're all probably aware of what's happened to Age UK in Suffolk. And we know also that some community buildings, village halls, community centres and church halls have been nervous about reopening. Some have reopened and obviously had to pause that again this week. And also that hubs for young people have been particularly affected. So things like out of school clubs, youth groups, uniformed organisations have been trying to find a way to continue to support young people and do so safely. So in terms of the statistics and data, that's what I was going to talk through. I'm going to now connect that back into the community partnerships. So In terms of our community partnerships, that's the list of individual community partnership priorities. We've already talked about the fact that that social isolation, loneliness and transport are priorities for 6 out of the 8 community partnerships. A couple of the community partnerships, as part of the process of responding to COVID, have reviewed their priorities and made some changes to their priorities. And you can see in red the changes there. Actually, what the changes to the Old Burleigh and Saxmundham and Villages one means is that we've now got 7 community partnerships who've got social isolation and loneliness in their top 3 effectively. Old Burleigh and Saxmundham and Villages looked at the next 3 down from the 3 priorities I'd identified. And obviously there are links between social isolation, loneliness and mental health and wellbeing. So we considered at board level the impact of COVID. So we'd got this list of priorities, we'd got an overall list of priorities at a board level, but then along came COVID. So the board reviewed what it was focusing on, agreed that isolation and loneliness were still 2 key priorities, but in terms of our response to COVID, identified 3 particular areas that they wanted to focus on, and we've touched on all of these previously. So social isolation and loneliness, I've already talked about that being an existing priority, but I think the board recognised that it was a huge issue in terms of both the immediate and the long-term impacts of COVID-19 on resilience, connections, and just the desire to try and reduce the number of people who are lonely in East Suffolk. Sustaining community hubs and community resilience. I've talked about the community response, but there's a question about how we capture and retain the energy that was generated, but also to fill in any gaps, because there wasn't an equal community response across the whole of the district. And there's a question about how we help vital community hubs, both physical and virtual hubs, to get up and running. And we've talked a lot about vulnerability. I guess most of the presentation has been about vulnerability. And I think a real priority has to be about supporting the most vulnerable communities and people. And I've talked about how COVID won't impact every place and every age group equally, and that potentially the difference could increase. So there's a question about what we do to reduce these differences into the future and into recovery. So I'm going to take each of these 3 in turn and just talk through what the board and the individual community partnerships and are doing to tackle those. But this is where I want you to think about where there might be gaps and where there might be other things that we could do as a community network of community partnerships and as a community partnership board and the partners working with us. So in terms of social isolation and loneliness, I've mentioned the hidden needs maps that we used. We used the social isolation map that I showed you earlier as the basis for identifying priority areas for our hidden needs grants programme. And the idea of that is to support locally led projects to reduce isolation and loneliness. We've funded 12 projects so far, totalling just over £80,000, and we've got £66,000 remaining for round 3. And the Community Partnership Board has invested £100,000 in that project over 2 years. Steve mentioned the GrandPads. And for those of you that don't know, GrandPads are simplified tablets for older people who haven't got a laptop or a computer or a tablet, and potentially also haven't got Wi-Fi. And they're tablets that have got a built-in card, so people don't need Wi-Fi to be able to connect. They've got big buttons, they've got a 24/7 help line, and we've got 100 of those, and delighted that they've been match funded by Ipswich and East Suffolk Clinical Commissioning Group. But the board has put in a £25,000 investment. East Suffolk Council invested in the pilot phase of that. We've worked with an organisation called Voice Cloud to support those who have got a computer and Wi-Fi, but were struggling to use their technology. We've invested in befriending support to combat social isolation and loneliness, both through the community response groups and grants through the hardship grants, but also a specific project in Lowestoft where we'd identified over 150 people who were lonely and isolated. And we've created a Voice of a Friend project, which has now been just a few weeks ago handed over to the Citizens Advice that covers North East Suffolk, because they also deliver social prescribing in the Lowestoft area, and that was funded by one of our community partnerships, the Lowestoft and Northern Parishes Community Partnership. And we also rolled some community partnership budget funding into the hardship fund, where we gave out grants totaling over £140,000 for the COVID response. In terms of the second priority, sustaining community hubs and community resilience, we've been doing some ongoing work with the COVID-19 response groups. We've been working with Community Action Suffolk to try and map these and ensure that we've got an up-to-date list of where those groups are and what they can provide, and the communities officers and the team are working really closely with those response groups. We're also looking at areas where there wasn't such a strong community response, for example, parts of Lowestoft, and thinking about how we can potentially stimulate additional community groups in that area. And as I mentioned, we supported the community response groups with grants through the Hardship Fund. Our new fund is the new Bounce Back Fund that came out of the conversations at the board, our previous version on this presentation, which was about helping voluntary and community and social enterprise organisations to transition to new ways of working. And the board was really keen that we focus on some of the areas where we know that groups have struggled. So there is a priority given to projects for community buildings, for youth groups, and for organisations that involve volunteers. We've funded 12 projects in the first 2 weeks, and we've had 9 applications this week, and that was funded through £100,000 of Community Partnership Board funding. And finally, in this section, we've been working with Community Action Suffolk, who are leading a East Suffolk volunteering campaign linked to their Suffolk campaign, and in the context of a refresh of the Suffolk volunteering strategy. So I think that's a really important piece of work, just looking at, as I said earlier, about capturing the energy that was generated through the COVID response. In terms of vulnerable people and places, the East Suffolk Youth Employment Service is now operating effectively virtually, and that's done a lot of work with 16 to 24-year-olds. Obviously, they're likely to be even more in demand over the coming weeks and months, helping young people to access education, employment, training, volunteering and work. Links with all of the social prescribing schemes. So we've got three that cover East Suffolk, plus the Interreg funded mobile project that covers 4 of our community partnership areas. And I think those relationships have strengthened significantly during the response to COVID, and I think that they are key in terms of supporting vulnerable people in our communities. We've run a Money Matters campaign and done some work around encouraging people to seek help as early as possible. That's been in conjunction with our 3 Citizens Advice, and we also fund Disability Advice North East Suffolk. A couple of schemes at county level, which are a key part of the current sort of home but not alone response phase. So there's a new Suffolk Welfare Assistance Scheme, which provides things like fuel vouchers, access to white goods and furniture, supermarket vouchers, and also the overarching Suffolk Advice and Support Service, which have both been set up through the Collaborative Communities Board. The Suffolk Advice and Support Service is run by the network of Citizens Advice that cover East Suffolk. So it's very much about helping people to manage their money, maximise the money that they can access, but also to manage their money effectively. And at an East Suffolk level, we've been using something called the Low Income Family Tracker to identify and support vulnerable individuals and families. So we did some proactive targeted work with individuals and families during the first lockdown, but also during the recovery phase. And then we've got some other ideas. So this is my last slide. We've got some other ideas that came out of the Task and Finish group that sits underneath the board, and which has been looking specifically at the COVID response. So one of those is an employment support gateway to try and help people find the right information about work, training, apprenticeships and volunteering, because it seems to be quite complex. There's lots of different websites. What we'd like to do is provide a portal that helps people navigate their way through. We would like to do some work on skills development, and we've identified some specific groups that we'd like to target. So care leavers, 16 to 24 and 25 to 34-year-olds, seasonal workers and over 55s, as we think they could be particularly at risk. We want to develop a something called what we've renamed this week as the East Box. Which is activity packs for older people who are living on their own, which focus on encouraging them to eat well, keep active, reduce loneliness and active minds. And we're working with a number of partners to develop that. It's like a version of the Summer in a Box that was developed for young people, but it's specifically aimed at older people aged over 65 who are likely to be lonely over the winter period. We are hoping to work with various partners to develop some projects to reduce frailty and vulnerability in older people at home, and that very much links to the session that was held yesterday at BT. Work to tackle food poverty. I think that's going to be critical over the coming months and potentially years. We know that food banks have seen a significant increase in demand, so looking at how we can provide a range of food projects. For example, the community enablers in Lowestoft are working on some community fridges and community pantries, so looking at what package of support we can provide to people who need support to access food. And I think it's really important we continue to identify people that are potentially the most vulnerable and who might need additional support, using data from a number of sources. So people that are already using the Suffolk Advice and Support Service and the local welfare assistance scheme, but also the low income family tracker as well. So those are some of the ideas that the board and the Task and Finish group have come up with. And that's a lot of talking from me, a lot of information, but hopefully it was useful and interesting, and will stimulate some thoughts and ideas. So I am now going to stop sharing my screen and hand back over to Steve.
Nicole, 1,000 thanks. I mean, that was really, really interesting. As you say, there's a lot of information in there, and I'm sure that it will take many of us quite a lot of time to process it all. But I think that's really, really useful. I think what's important is that we understand the issues and problems that are being faced by people right across our district. But what we've looked at there is a whole set of stats and numbers and graphs and figures. But the reality of that is, as we've said before, and it's same as we did at the community partnership workshops when we first started these off. It's all about sense checking that data. It's all about understanding and getting that insight from the local communities as to what this data actually translates into for what's happening on the ground and where our priorities and assistance should be going. I think it's so, as Nicole said at one point in her presentation, it's all about asking you people, where are the gaps? What more can we do? What should we be focusing on? And I think that's really key for us to understand. What we can't do as a council or as local community groups is buy our way out of these issues. We've got to work together. We've got to come together. There is not an infinite pot of money that we can keep throwing at project after project after project. So what we do put our money into has got to really be there to deliver results, and that's what's key. If I had a magic wand, and often I have a magic wand, but if I had a magic wand, I would wave it, and all this problems and issues would go away. But we know that's not true. But what we also know is true is that East Suffolk Council, in isolation, cannot deliver the answers to all the problems and issues that both COVID-19 has brought, and those problems and issues that were there prior to the pandemic as well. So I think it's really important that we do continue to work together. And that's why I'm so pleased, that we set up the community partnerships in the first place, because this is the opportunity to bring that local focus into communities and build on that cohesion, build on the goodwill of the neighbour schemes and the local voluntary schemes that can assist us all in our ambitions. So I'm going to move to questions and answers. And I absolutely understand that there was a lot of information there, and I'm sure that Nicole and others that are on this call can help to answer any questions that you have. So I'll take those questions as you have them. I'm looking at the participants box, which I've opened by clicking on that participant button at the bottom there. And if you click on that, you'll see 58 participants in this call at the moment. And at the bottom of that, you should see a little thing that says raise your hand. And if you raise your hand, a little blue hand will appear on the list that I've got. And David Bevan is the first one to get in there with his hand up. David, do you have a question or comment?
Yes, I know you don't like spending money, Steve, but I think, we could commit very useful amount of money to solve two problems. We've got a lot of young people who are going to be unemployed. We've got a lot of old people who are the wrong side of the digital divide. It shouldn't really be all our job, but can we really get these two things sorted out by paying some young people to help old people join society?
Okay, thank you, David. Well, first of all, I'll pick you up on the first point. Actually, I absolutely love spending money. That's the first thing. So, what I'd like to spend is even more money than I've got, which of course then my chief finance officer won't let me do that. But I do absolutely love spending money. To pick up the point you've made for me about linking together the older members of the community who are not digitally adept to younger members of the community who are digitally adept, I think that needs to be delivered, David, at a local level, because I guarantee you that if I've got an older member of the community that lives next door to me, and they get a knock on the door, and it is a young person that's come from wherever, saying, by the way, I've come in to help you get digitally adept. I think that would be all sorts of alarm bells ringing there. And the first thing you'll be going is, you're not coming in here and I don't want to be digitally adept. So it is about the local communities reaching out and trying to deliver that. And absolutely, if there's community initiatives that want to promote that and build on that, then I'm sure that's something we can support through the various funds that we have available if it requires financial funding to do that. But you may well find that it doesn't. But that's a different issue. But thank you, David. Susan Stewart.
Hi. Hi, I've unmuted myself. I was quite interested in youth and young people as a particularly vulnerable group, but I'm also aware that the glaring omission is talking about education and educational institutions. So what could be done to work more collaboratively with schools, FE colleges, the University of Suffolk, which is here in Lowestoft as well. But also, I suppose the other thing I'm slightly concerned about is you talked about skills development. And that tends to be targeted right at the bottom, but we do have a big problem with the middles, the missing middles. It's like we've got kids who get okay GCSEs, but what do they do with them? We've got people with degrees, what do they do with them? All of those things. So it's not just focusing right at the bottom, but what do we do for everybody? Because I believe in education for well-being. That coming out of this, we're going to have to look at what do we need now, rather than just addressing the bottom. So I think there's an omission with education. They're just not here, and I'm not convinced that anybody's talking to them, and they really should be included in discussions going forward.
Okay, thank you, Susan. I'm going to bring Nicole in to help frame an answer for that.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Really good point. I think just to reassure you, I mean, you mentioned Lowestoft. There obviously are particular challenges in Lowestoft. Through Lowestoft Rising, we've done an awful lot of work with the schools and colleges, and have regular meetings with the heads and deputy heads in both North Lowestoft and South Lowestoft. So it is something that's seen as a priority. We're working with a number of partners at a Suffolk level to explore some work with the National Literacy Trusts projects to support young people in East Suffolk, but particularly in some hotspot areas. And I know, for example, some of the individual community partnerships, Felixstowe is a good example, have put some money into supporting the library at the school in Felixstowe. So I think it's a really important point. I think your point about the missing middles is a really good one, and one that we've not thought of. But one of the things we're going to do as a result of this is capture all of the ideas and thoughts and comments about gaps and feed that into the next community partnership board meeting. So your thoughts won't be lost, but I think that's a good one that we could explore further.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, Susan. That, as you say, that's a really, really interesting point. I'll continue working down the list of blue hands. Peter Byer.
Thank you, Stephen. Apologies for lack of video. Just coming back to what Dave.
Don't see you.
Yeah, probably best you don't see me. Actually, the way I look, I've been up all night watching the Trump stuff. Anyway, I agree totally with what David is saying about involving both ends of the community with this digital thing. And as you know, it's one of my favourite things to bang on about. And having seen one of the grand pads in operation, I think going down that way and it doesn't just have to be elderly people, but I think that's the intention. Can we look at talking to the other district councils in Suffolk, talking to the county, and dare I say even over the border in Norfolk, to look at purchasing with economy of scale? Because I know that I've been told there's something like £1,000 each, getting those out there and making those a regular thing so that we have got engagement with people, who are outside the digital world. And I think that is really key to the future. We know, and you, Steve, have talked about this a great deal. On Monday, you were talking about communication being absolutely essential, and also communicating with the outside world as to what the community partnership boards and groups are doing. Tremendous work, tremendous plans, and we need to make sure that people know what we're doing, what's done and dusted, putting up the success criteria, and moving on to the next key issue, and looking at all of those issues across the boards, across East Suffolk. Goodness me, how many common issues we've got around loneliness, obesity, mental health, and that. And now with COVID part 2, the mental health issues are surely going to ramp up even more. But can I just say now, publicly, thank you for this week, Steve, and to the officers, and for the work that's being done at all levels, but particularly at the community partnership groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to bring Nick Carn in, if I may, just to comment on the grandpad question, if I may, Nick.
Yes, Steve. Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm.
Nick, we can't hear your word you're saying, I'm afraid.
He needs a grandpad.
He does. He needs a grandpad. Yeah.
Do you want me to chip in, Steve?
Yeah, go on, Nicole, please.
If we could, and then if Nick wants to come back. So, Nick's been doing what I'm going to guess what Nick was going to say. So Nick's been a bit of an ambassador for the grandpad. So he's been talking to the other districts and borough councils about the grandpads through various digital meetings that he's on. He's also been working closely with adult social care and talking about the opportunities to use technology to support people through in various settings, so residential settings, etc. I did a presentation a couple of weeks ago, which was to a group that the Ipswich and East Suffolk CCG had set up, and the invitation went far and wide. And I'm glad I didn't find out till afterwards, but there were 340 people on the call. But I actually did a bit of a demo of a grandpad, and that stimulated loads of interest. I've had lots of enquiries from that, so I think we are getting a lot of interest. I think the fact that the CCG has put £50,000 in to sponsor some grandpads shows how positively they see the work that we're doing. So there's definitely interest at a Suffolk level, but I agree there are potentially opportunities to purchase at scale and get an even better price. I think we were one of the first districts to to use gram pads in England. They've come over from America and been adapted for the English market. I got accused of being a salesperson for Tech Silver, who produced the gram pads, but I do genuinely think they're a really good solution. They are quite expensive, as Peter says, but I do think they do the job that we need them to do, and the people that have had them love them. And we've had a few that have already graduated from their grandpad because their children have bought them a tablet or a laptop because they've got on so well with them. They then said, no, we'll give you this back, we'll end our loan period so that somebody else can benefit for this, because, you know, granddad or mum has made really good progress. And that's the whole point. It's also pushing people's boundaries. And so it's not just about the social connections and being able to do a video call with your daughter while she's out walking the dog so you feel like you're out with her. It's also about trying to encourage people to access health services online and to access their supermarket priority slots if they're a clinically extremely vulnerable person. So I think the possibilities are endless, and we will do what we can to buy as many more as possible.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. I don't know if Nick Khan's back with us now, but I think you've probably covered off what he was going to say. Nick, are you back with us?
I'm not in trouble.
No, I'll take that. I'll take that as a no. But anyway, he stuck his thumb up, which is all very good. So, Peter, I think you're absolutely right, and I would reiterate what Nicole has said, in that, you know, we are finding that people are moving on. So, you know, £1,000 a pop is a lot of money, but that, of course, isn't just for the hardware. You know, that's for the connection, that's for the IT support that comes with it. It's for the monitoring of it. There's a lot that goes in to delivering these. But the other thing I'd say is that, you know, from my own experience, not everybody that needs assistance and help is destitute or poor. And I think that's the other thing. There are a number of people across our district, as we've seen from the heat maps, in many more affluent areas that actually can afford a solution, but what they need to be shown is what the potential of that solution is. So some of it is about education, not purely about providing something for nothing to somebody, but rather educating them as to what is out there and what is available out there. But Peter, many thanks for your question. I'm going to bring in Nick, if I can. Nick.
I'm assuming you're talking to me, Steve.
I am. Yeah, it just says Nick, but
thank you. Obviously, Nicole knows that we are piloting the gram pads in Frowning as well, because we got some as well at the early stages. And what you've just said is exactly the case. The fact that a lot of the older people who can actually afford these things, they need to try it first. There's no other way of trying it by you giving them one to try to start with. And that's actually working remarkably well. And Nicole has very kindly, we're trying to pick another 6 before that we're piloting as well around the town. So we're working on that to see how it goes. But I mean, I agree entirely with you, is the fact that I think a lot of people will end up buying these themselves, because I think that is the way it's going to be for a lot of these people. And also because they're so much safer, because they can work with families, they're not going to be sort of subject to spoof emails and spoof connections and all the rest of it. It's great. But can I just say that as a East Suffolk Council, I want to thank you very much, basically, because I know Nicole's been working incredibly hard on all this, and I think what we've started here is something that it's like a snowball. It's really beginning to build now, and a lot of communities are really getting on board. You've been incredibly supportive to the work that we do in Framlingham. But the great thing about it is the fact that it's by talking and by working with each other, and if we can share ideas and share experiences, we are, as our community, we're more than happy to share with anybody what you've been doing. But I'd like to thank Nicole and all her team for everything that you've done, and Steve, obviously, your support throughout this COVID period. And I'm convinced that by working communities together the way we are at the moment, we can actually turn this into the most unbelievable community as a group of people, and show what really can be done in our district, basically. So thank you very much for all your help and support.
Thank you, Nick. That's really positive, and I think you're right. Our ambition really is, as I said right at the very beginning, it's not about doing stuff to people. It's about helping people sort out stuff for themselves. And you know, if we've got a bit of money we can throw at it, or some resources, or a team of experts, which we do happen to have, that we can throw at it, then we're really happy to do that. Mark Jepson.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. A couple of points. One is regarding the different pots and community partnership stuff we've got going on, and some really positive stuff, is trying to persuade some of the statutory agencies to sort of get on board with us, because I think we can offer some diversionary activities for some, you know, some key families and individuals. And we're trying it here and it's working, but it's slow. So it's not a criticism of the statutory agencies, but I think we need to try and sell that message to them that actually we can offer something for them, which in the long term may help them and families and individuals. Just the other one is in terms of food poverty, and you've sort of mentioned it, Steve, that you know, I presume we want to be a facilitator of groups and food poverty rather than becoming a leader of whatever that may shake up. And I see Nicole shaking her head. Again, I know we're lucky in food, so we've got some really good groups, and I know elsewhere they could do with a basic or something like that there. But I think Nicole just shook her head, so we facilitate, not lead on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I mean, I will bring Nicole in. I think what's important in respect of statutory and other voluntary organisations coming on board with what it is that we're trying to do. I think that the way you do that is to keep doing what you're doing and deliver results. And when things are successful and they're working, then far more people come forward and go, oh, that's good. I'd like to be part of that, or part of the next thing, or part of the next thing. I know that the work that you're doing as the chair of the community partnership in the Billingsstone Peninsula, Mark, is absolutely doing that. You know, people are starting to see the difference that the community partnerships are making, and seeing the benefit of working together in partnership, hence the name, in order to deliver those really good ideas. So I absolutely think you're right. Nicole, is there anything that you want to add to that?
Just in terms of the work around food, Community Action Suffolk have done a piece of work at county level to understand what food resources are out there and understand what they could offer to the communities. So I think we've got a much clearer picture coming out of the first lockdown and understanding what the capacity of organisations is. I mean, I think it's absolutely what Mark says. It's about enabling people, and there's lots of other organisations doing things around food. I mentioned the community fridges and community pantries. We've obviously got a network of food banks. So I think what we've been trying to do is just to support where they've identified that they've got a support need. So for example, in Lowestoft, we helped the food bank to move into the East Point Pavilion, because that at that point wasn't being used. And that enabled them to operate much more safely, to have a one-way system as people were coming to collect their parcels. They were much more COVID secure because of that, and we're helping them to move into other premises. We provided several of them with additional funding. So I think it's about enabling what they do, rather than stepping in to try and fix the problem ourselves, because there's people out there that know a lot more about this than we do. But as I say, I think we've got a much clearer picture of what's out there, where the gaps are, and what support they might need.
Thank you, Nicole. Thanks, Mark. Chris Spundell.
Thank you, Steve. I really wanted to answer some comments that were made earlier by a lady, that getting to talk to what we call the middle age, I say middle age, the older youngsters, if you like, between the ages of about 16 and 30. If you try to do this through the schools, unfortunately, the schools are very resistive to outsiders coming in to talk to pupils. And we've found this on several occasions, not only I, but other groups that I've talked to and worked with as well. But one scheme that does work quite well for me, but it is a personal one, is that I support our local football teams, and I get in to talk to them and talk to the players, and generally get ideas and talk to them about things that matter to them. And very often the parents are around as well, and they often support what I'm doing. And I do this as an individual counsellor, but also because I believe in the development of the sporting scheme, both for the well-being, physical well-being of the youngsters, although they do get injured now and again, and also the community spirit that generates around it. So it really is a good way of actually getting at young people, and I'm talking at age range from about 16 to 30 plus, and I get good conversations with them on their activities. Bearing in mind, some of the older end are also married as well, with children. So yes, I like the being involved with that kind of scheme. And my problem is actually access to the people who need help. We don't know much about the local community in the sense of people who live there, but when they come together as a group, then we can talk to them more easily. That is a big distinction, that if you can talk to them as a group, that works. But of course, doing it individually, that is often left to the welfare people and what have you. Anyway, I think I've said enough. I'll shut up now.
Thank you, Chris. No, I think you make a very valid point. I think, you know, one of the beauties of the community partnerships is they are all chaired by local ward councillors who have a good understanding of what's going on in their patch, but they don't know everything. And you know, I'm sure you've been the first to admit it, Chris. You know, we don't know everything that goes on in our patch. But what we can do is we can bring in our colleagues from the parishes, from the town councils, from community groups, and we can start to build that picture of what's going on. And I would encourage every community partnership to have some sort of mapping exercise to understand where people are coming together and who's coming together where and when, and use that information to actually reach out to the various groups that there may be. And you know, it may be that, you know, that mapping process doesn't identify every group you need to reach now, but you may need to reach those various sectors in a later time, in 12 months, in 18 months, who knows what's down the road. But it is making that early contact with these community groups, telling them what the ambitions and aims and priorities of the community partnership are. And I guarantee that a lot of those groups will be very supportive, both in terms of resources and individuals to help you deliver against those priorities. So I think you make a very, very valid point, Chris. Thank you. Let's have a look. Any other comments or questions? I can't see any more blue hands up, but I do appreciate. Oh, yes, I've got another one. Chrissy Abrams.
Thanks, Steve. I just want to say how pleased I am to hear so much recognition of the contribution of the voluntary community and social enterprise sector. I'd also like to say that, you know, we are not one homogenous body here. We're talking about quite large charities that cover the whole of the district and indeed the county, and sometimes larger than the county. But we're also talking about those very small grassroots organisations that run, you know, with just a few volunteers, no paid staff, very little income. They don't need income. So when we talk about the resilience of the voluntary sector, it's not all about money. It's quite often about people who can help out as volunteers, as members of the management committee, trustees, helping to deliver activities. So I think there's real opportunity, and I'm really pleased to see that the community partnership boards are looking at how they can reach out and get more representation of some of those local community groups and voluntary organisations to help shape the priorities for that area and how funding can best be invested for the benefit of the community. But I just want to say thanks to everyone and working really closely with Nicole and her team to make sure that, you know, we've got a really strong voluntary sector, which we have in East Suffolk. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I think it would be foolhardy for us not to recognise the huge value that the volunteers and the community groups bring. There is no way on this earth that we could cover the cost of delivering the services that are being delivered by the thousands of volunteers and that are delivering them free of charge in order to support the most vulnerable in our community. So they're absolutely critical. But I think the other thing that you'll know, Christine, and I'm sure many others will as well, you know, actually helping others is really cathartic and good for the people that are doing the helping as well. And I think, you know, that's what's key. You know, if I wasn't doing what I'm doing now, and sometimes I wonder why I am, if I wasn't doing what I'm doing now, what would I be doing now? I'd be sitting in my house doing nothing. And that can't be good for my own mental health and well-being any more than it is. At times I wonder whether I could just sit in a dark, quiet room for an hour or two. That would be quite pleasant. But the reality is that we all do this. We all do the things we do, and because not only does it help other people, but it helps us as well. And I think that's a really important message to understand. So I think it's incumbent upon us not only to make good use of the volunteers because it's good for other people, but to make good use of the volunteers because it's really good for the volunteers as well. And people want to feel useful and loved. And by the way, I love you all, but that's a different story. Okay, any other questions or points? Any other hands? I can't see any more blue hands, but I'm just going to pause for a moment in case anyone can't find their blue hand but wants to say things. So shout out now if you've got something you want to add. Jane Murray.
Right. I want to thank the council and for everyone taking part in this. It's been really fantastic. But I have been missing Nicole's presentation since not being on the council, so that was really good. And I wondered, I'm a trustee of Alton Pause Trust, and we often are asked for, you know, support, and sometimes we're sort of flailing around thinking, we haven't got much money, what can we do? But your signposting of all the different things, you know, the groups that could be used by us would be very useful. And I wondered whether it's possible for you to forward your slides onto people here. I know I'm not in the district council, but you know, whether the parish or Pause Trust will be able to receive that.
Thank you, Jane. Just to reassure you, as I said right at the beginning, this is being recorded. You will receive a link to these presentations, so via our YouTube channel. So all that stuff will be coming out to everybody that is registered for any of the sessions right across the week. So you'll even get be able to watch any that you couldn't have made for various reasons. You'll be able to look at those as well. So
that's lovely, Steve. Thank you. Thank you,
Jane. Graham Newman.
Yes, thank you, Steve. I just wanted to thank Nicole really for her excellent presentation. There's some pretty chilling statistics in there, and you know, some I'd quite like to take up with her, but not in the present meeting. But it kind of shows you the challenge that councils and councillors have got coming up really over the next year or so, as we try and sort of patch up society as a consequence of all that's happening at the moment. And I think the thing that particularly scares me is the number of people who've never had an interface with council issues, the job centre, any of these kind of help schemes, you know, and they're just being thrown off their jobs at pretty short notice. And I think we just got to really look out for those kind of people and try and direct them in the right place. You know, we're doing everything we can locally. I think when this kind of information comes out, a lot of us are putting it on social media to sort of help spread the word, but then not everyone's looking at that. There's an awful lot of stuff on social media, so you don't see everything, you know. So a lot of work to do, but say thank you very much. It's a very interesting 5 days. I think I've been in quite a few of the sessions. The only ones I've missed are the ones I've been having to do something else on. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Graham. Okay, I think that is probably, we're reaching a conclusion of today's session. So, I mean, in summary, and I think Graham linked very nicely into that, you know, some of the stats that we've seen, some of the charts that we've seen do paint that bleak picture of the future. The things I would say is this, that, you know, if as a district and indeed as a county, we were in a far, far better place than many other districts, many other counties across the country. If you look at some of the issues and challenges that they've got, but that doesn't mean that we should go, oh, well, we're okay, we'll just sit back and enjoy it. Of course not. Any one person suffering is one person too many. But I think that what we have been able to do within East Suffolk and indeed the wider Suffolk system is to is to actually identify that. We are in a strong place to make a difference, and because we had already laid the foundations of a joined up system. I sit as a member of Suffolk Public Sector Leaders, and so, you know, the money that we have and the way that we have set up that working means that we work together as a system in order to provide support and financial support and pooling of resources in order to deliver right across the system. And that's invaluable, and that's not replicated. Trust me, it's not replicated across the rest of the country. So we're very fortunate that we already had that. We're very fortunate within East Suffolk that when we brought together the two councils, East Suffolk Suffolk Coastal District Council and Waveney District Council into East Suffolk Council, we've very much focused on this enabling communities agenda. And part of that and the delivery of that absolutely formed around the community partnerships and the community partnership boards that sits at the top of that, trying to deliver locally. And that's enabled both the local communities to have a point of reference and a point of contact and some financial resources in order to deliver the very important things that we are all delivering. And it's all you people that are here on this call today that are delivering those. So I just, I wanted to offer my thanks for everything that everybody is doing. Believe me, it is invaluable, and it is helping a lot of people right across our district. So as I mentioned to Jane, every delegate who has attended at least one session this week will be sent a link. Next week, we'll get those out with a dedicated playlist on our YouTube channel. So they'll find all the sessions available to view again. There's only one exception to that, and that's the BT session, which was not recorded because they give us a tour of their facility, and understandably, they don't want that out there on YouTube for all sorts of reasons, as I'm sure you will appreciate. Now, that email will also contain a link to a Survey Monkey. We love a quick Survey Monkey, don't we? For us to seek your views on this year's forum. I really, really would appreciate if you to respond to that, as we are continually seeking to improve the way that we engage in across the district, and we really want some feedback on how you think this forum has worked and what the pros and cons of it are. So we have also recorded all the comments and chats in all of the sessions, and we'll be processing those. So none of the good ideas that have come forward will be lost. They will all be gathered, they'll all be looked at by the team, and we'll, absolutely, I'm sure, without a shadow of a doubt, there's some really good ideas from across the week that we will end up taking forward. And of course, the Community Partnership Board will follow up all the outcomes of the forum at its meeting, and our next meeting is in December. So finally, today, I just want to again reiterate my thanks to everyone that's been involved in putting on this week's activity. Particular thanks to Nicole today for her presentation, which I think was really slick, really professional, and really absolutely delivered for us the information that we needed. So many, many thanks for that. And just remains for me to say thank you very much for everything that you're doing, and please do keep doing it. You know how to contact us. Please do. If you think there's anything that we can do to assist in any of your ambitions at all, please do reach out and let us know. To those that are involved in the community partnerships, many, many thanks for the work that you're doing with those. For those that aren't involved with the community partnership, why not get involved? And finally, wish you all very well over this difficult period and a safe journey back to your kitchens. Thank you very much.